Well, told me a premium account was required on Twitter, and I do have a. Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topics for tonight will be Scott Ritter's Operation Dawn, whether there's a revolution going on in Europe or not, and Fadhel Kaboub's report on his latest activities in developing nations and what they mean for such nations. So those are our topics for tonight. I'm going to start right off with Operation Dawn. I'll share the screen for that. Let's see what's wrong here. Here we go. Operation Dawn. Okay, so Operation Dawn is a Substack entry by Scott Ritter on his Scott Ritter Extra account. It was posted on July 12th, 2024. And there's Dawn. I don't know what the city is, but it's Dawn. The next president of the United States will likely be called upon to decide about engaging in a nuclear conflict. This doesn't have to be our future. It's time to get real, America. Election Day 2024, November 5th, is rapidly approaching, and the reality is that the person who wins will either have an R or a D next to his or her name. Well, that may or may not be the reality. I'm not going to discount such a prediction, but I did just get a video from the Kennedy campaign in my email today, or to be more precise, I got a video sent to me by Lisa Theobald that forwarded a message from the campaign. I might well have gotten the same message myself, but anyway, the email summarizes the growing electoral presence of the Kennedy campaign. It has now certified ballot access in 10 states: California, Delaware, Hawaii, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Utah. Signatures have been submitted, and they're awaiting the decision of the following states. Those are Alaska, Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, also Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Texas, and Washington. Then signatures have been collected but have yet to be submitted in Florida, in Idaho, in Iowa, and in New Hampshire. I should mention that when they collect signatures in various states, they have invariably collected 3 times the required number of signatures in order to handle challenges in those states. Also, the total electoral votes they say they have secured is 390 electoral votes, representing 73% of the 538 total electoral votes nationwide. And they call for continued support so they get on the ballot in all 50 states. But according to the campaign, that's the record of progress, right now. They start off the email saying, "We're thrilled to announce a major victory in our campaign for true democracy. The North Carolina Board of Elections has officially certified the We the People Party, giving Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Nicole Shanahan certified ballot access in this critical swing state. This marks our second battleground state following Michigan, where Kennedy's ballot access has been officially secured. The board's decision is a testament to the hard work of our dedicated volunteers who collected nearly double the required signatures." So, in Michigan, then they had double the required signatures. They usually aim for 3 times the required signatures, but they survived any challenge, in Michigan, and they have secured their ballot access there, as well as in North Carolina. So, going forward now, there are many Americans support a candidate with an I or a G next to their names. I guess the G is the Green Party, and the I is for people running as independents. But Scott says, but these candidates won't win the White House. A vote for those candidates is little more than a protest vote. Time for protest is over. It's now the time, for action. And he goes on and says, that America is fundamentally divided over who should occupy the White House for the next 4 years. If you support the D candidate, you think the R candidate, who previously served as president for 4 years, was the worst president, in American history. And if you support the R candidate, you think the same about the current D candidate. The reality, however, is that America survived 4 years of the R guy, and so far we have survived 4 years of the D guy. Well, not entirely 4 years, of course. And it is highly likely that we will survive the next 4 years as well, regardless of who wins, unless there is a nuclear war. Then we all die. This is Scott saying this. There are many issues confronting America today. All of them are important, but most of them divide us. None are of immediate existential concern. Nuclear war is an immediate existential threat to our existence, and yet this issue is not being discussed or debated in the lead up to the November 5th elections. As such, no matter who we put in the White House, America will face the real probability of nuclear war during their term in office. and we all die. So the question we all face, as Americans, is what are we willing to do to prevent this outcome? What would you do to save democracy? What would you do to save America? What would you do to save the world? The answer, by making your vote count in November. Make your vote count about the one issue which is literally life and death, preventing a nuclear war by promoting peace. How? By pledging your vote to the single issue of preventing nuclear war and promoting peace. By avoiding the trap presented by political party or personality. By declaring that your vote will go to the candidate that best articulates a policy designed to avoid a nuclear war and promote peace. This election will be decided by tens of thousands of voters spread out among several critical battleground states. If enough Americans commit their vote to the issue of preventing nuclear war and promoting peace, shall they constitute a constituency capable of swinging a state to the candidate that earns their vote by promulgating such a policy, then we have a chance to put someone in the White House who won't kill us all by getting us involved in a nuclear conflict once he or she is elected. That's a diagram of the number of rads, of radiation that would be running across the landscape in case we had a nuclear war. Greater than 3,500 rads, I gather, is absolutely fatal. I guess 1050 to 3,500 rads maybe gives you some time, and 300 to 1050 rads, while also fatal, takes longer time. But we'll see what the diagram signifies as we move forward in the article. 1986, scientists from the Institute of Medicine published a study exploring the potential impact of a nuclear strike on the continental United States. The study highlighted the most dangerous zones produced by such a strike on a map, indicating where radiation exposure would surpass 3,500 rads. Within this region, more than 3/4 of the population would die, the study concluded. It is our hope, the authors of the study declared, that national decision makers will develop a better understanding of the collateral consequences of hypothetical first strikes and of the enormous destructive capacity of the weapons that would survive. That understanding should make them less likely to see counterforce capabilities or to fear such attacks from the other side. In 1987, the U.S. and Soviet Union signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, INF Treaty, a foundational arms control agreement which eliminated entire categories of nuclear missiles and set the stage for even larger reductions in the strategic nuclear arsenals of the respective sides. Today, the INF Treaty is no more. The last strategic arms control treaty is set to expire. There are no new arms control arms control negotiations. Both the United States and Russia are building new nuclear weapons as part of an arms race that has the world on the cusp of general nuclear war. The next president of the United States will more than likely be faced with a decision regarding whether or not to enter into a nuclear conflict with Russia. So I ask again, what would you do to save democracy? What would you do to save America? What would you do to save the world? What would you do to make your vote count in November? By supporting Operation Dawn, you will have the opportunity to accomplish all these tasks. Operation Dawn is a nationwide event designed to garner 1 million+ pledges by American voters to make preventing nuclear war and promoting peace the single issue upon which they will cast their vote come December. Join us in Kingston, New York on September 28th at one of our satellite locations throughout America or online through one of our affiliated podcasts. Help save your future. For more information and updates, visit scottritter.com. So there it is. I thought I would carry that here because it's a movement, okay, that's going on. It has a purpose. It's a constructive purpose. Whether it will succeed or not, whether it will rival some other things that have gone on around Kingston, New York, or not, okay, is another question. But okay, the Woodstock event is the most famous other event that took place there. So whether this does as well or better than Woodstock or not remains to be seen. The article doesn't tell us how many will die in the area of 1050 to 3,500 rads. That's the white area on the map. That's actually most of the map. And then the striped area, 300 to 1050 rads. How many people are likely to die, or what percentage of people are likely to die, okay, in those areas. That would be nice to know. But anyway, that's that article. I think it's a constructive event. If I could go myself, okay, I would. It should be very, very interesting. Okay. But in this context, I do want to come forward with my opinion once again. Okay, it is focused on what we need to do to heal the damage that has been done by this Supreme Court. Scott asks, what would you do to save democracy? What would you do to save America? What would you do to save the world? Well, what I suggested, of course, and have been suggesting in the last weeks, is that what you need to do to save democracy is to vote out every Republican in Congress, every Republican in the House, every Republican in the Senate, okay, as well, and every Democrat who appears to favor, okay, the decisions of this Supreme Court. As you know, I'm also for voting out everybody who is taking big money. That includes all the Republicans, and it includes just about all the Democrats also. So if you acted according to these two things, I think you would be saving democracy, but you would also be saving America, and you would also be saving the world, because the only candidate who would be left to actually vote for, as of now, well, there would be three. There would be, I don't know whether the Libertarian candidate would qualify, but certainly Jill Stein and Cornel West and Claudia de la Cruz, okay, would qualify as candidates who would do things that would save America by negotiating peace treaties with Russia and China. and also by turning around the decisions of the Supreme Court, which have brought this country within an ace of having a fascist system as opposed to a democracy. So I thought I would cover that. Now, the second piece I'm going to cover tonight is from Alistair Crook. I picked it up at onthis.com. It's a pretty good piece on what's going on in Europe. The title of it is, quote, Operation Jupiter, unquote, and a revolution in the making. Interesting, it didn't have too many comments on onthis.com. I wonder why. Only 7 comments. There's a graphic of, it looks like a rooster, doesn't it? Lifting a clay figure. Okay, that's a map of Europe that the clay figure actually centered on France. Okay, and the face of the clay figure looks very much like Emmanuel Macron. The caption is the, quote, new populism on the left and right, and the collapse of these, quote, centrist, unquote, cordon sanitaire. Okay, Brussels elites let out their long sigh of relief. The French right was blocked. Markets complacently shrugged, quote, everything must change, quote unquote, to remain the same, unquote. The center will find a way. Specifically, Macron successfully had blocked the populist right and left through mandating a centrist tactical defensive line to be dug, obstructing both political poles, and the tactical blockade was a success. The right-wing Le Pen party, that's in quotes, right-wing is in quotes, out of 32% of the votes cast, won 125 seats, just 22% of the legislature. The left took 180 seats out of a 26% share of the vote. So the important thing to note here is that even though the right-wing Le Pen party had 32% of the votes cast, those were distributed in such a way that it was only 22% of the legislature. The left, which was a united front of a number of parties, a popular front, took 180 seats, again, for a 26% share of the vote. And Macron's bloc, the Ensemble, claimed 159 seats. They got that with 25% of the vote. So the group that was most efficient in getting seats based on its share of the vote was the Popular Front, actually. Very high rate of efficiency compared to the other parties. The least efficient of all the parties in getting seats inside the legislature was the Le Pen party. They only got 22%, with 32% of the votes cast. So no one party has enough seats to govern. Usually this requires some 240 to 250 seats. If this is deemed success, it surely is a Pyrrhic success. The leftists comprise a spectrum of opposites, from anarchists to contemporary Leninists, whose Mélenchon core will never cooperate with Macron's centrists, nor with Le Pen's aggrieved followers either. Historian Maxime Tandonnet says it is a heroic misinterpretation of events to think that Macron has achieved anything other than a fiasco. Quote, Operation Jupiter, which was the operation by the Macron campaign, has degenerated into the worst possible scenario. It is a total impasse, unquote. It is impossible to form a functioning government from this assembly melee. Macron has refused the resignation of the losing PM, asking him to stay on ad interim, on an interim basis. Well, as Henri Uday, former director of research at the Saint-Cyr Military Academy, observes, no one can doubt that a revolution is in the making in France. Expenditure by the state and the welfare state far exceeds resources which it is almost impossible to increase significantly either through economic growth or taxation. Quote again, the only way for the state to make ends meet is to run up increasing debts, which can only be supported by very low interest rates, but above all by the ability to issue money infinitely out of thin air, thanks to the euro's privileged link to the German high credit rating for 10-year bunds. Well, I don't even think that's possible. I think the only way to get out of this for France is to leave the euro, get the franc back, and become a monetary sovereign. But I think that's a story for another day. Were these facilities to cease, quote, financiers estimate that France should have to cut the salaries of its civil servants or cut back their numbers by around a third, and retirement pensions of everyone by a fifth. This is obviously unfeasible. Yes, it is unfeasible in France, because if you did this, then everyone would get into the streets and never leave. Quote, what is in reality a budget and trade deficit is disguised as debt and would have been purged 30 years ago by national currency devaluation. But this debt artifice increasingly benefits the rich, whilst the general population never ceases to grumble, living its rose-tinted dream and held in blind ignorance of the state of our finances. That said, the ruling class is well aware of the situation, but prefers not to talk about it because no one knows what to do, unquote. And quote again, there can be no doubt at the moment of truth when states declare themselves to be bankrupt. I don't think there's a legal category of bankrupt states. I interject. Going on, the West will be shaken to the core, and some will pop like champagne corks. The economy will have to be reorganized. Perhaps also we will see a cultural revolution. It was the failure of the French state, let us not forget, that provoked the French Revolution. Quote again, but you may ask, why cannot this monetary profligacy go on indefinitely? That is what we're going to find out, but not just yet, unquote. And quote again, today, even before the bankruptcy has been declared, the loss of confidence in the institutions, the powerlessness of the public authorities, deprived of prestige and authority, and the detestation of the president make it possible to foresee the energy of the shockwave that would be unleashed by revelation of the fiasco. A, quote, Greek-style, unquote, scenario is unlikely in France. We had better bet on something else. Controlled inflation and a devaluation of the euro, unquote. Of course, France is not alone, okay? Quote, the euro system was supposed to force the countries of the euro to be financially wise and virtuous, quote unquote, but the very contrary happened, unquote. The sound credit of Germany permitted other EU states to lean heavily upon the German privileged rating to self-indulge in infinite debt through keeping all EU sovereign debt levels artificially low. So long as the privilege of the US dollar persists, that of the euro should remain, except that the war in Ukraine is ruining German industry first and foremost. France already faces an EU excessive deficit procedure, so do other EU states. Germany has its debt brake and must make cuts of euro $40 billion. Austerity is underway in most of the Eurozone. Oh, austerity again in the Eurozone. That means very hard times, unless, of course, so the Eurozone uh, uh, becomes a compact where the individual states are allowed to run very large deficits in order uh, to get each of the individual companies out of the terrible austerity cycle they're falling into. But going on, the American dollar at the apex of this liberal debt pyramid is crumbling, along with the Western, quote, rules-based order, unquote. The world's geostrategic plates, quote unquote, as well as its cultural zeitgeist, are shifting. Put plainly, the problem inadvertently exposed by Macron is insoluble. Quote, we might call the emerging ethos, quote, the new populism, unquote, unquote, writes Jeffrey Tucker. And here's a quote from Jeffrey Tucker. It is neither left nor right, but it borrows themes from both in the past. From the so-called, quote, right, unquote, it derives the confidence that people in their own lives and communities have a better capacity for wise decision-making than trusting the authorities at the top. From the old left, the new populism takes the demand for free speech, fundamental rights, and a deep suspicion of corporate and government power. Quote, the theme of being skeptical of empowered and entrenched elites is the salient point. This applies across the board. It is not only about politics. It hits the media, also medicine, courts, academia, and every other high-end sector. And this is in every country. This really does amount to a paradigmatic shift. It seems not temporary, but substantial and likely lasting, unquote. And quote again, what happened over 4 years has unleashed a mass wave of incredulity and a sense of the illegitimacy of the elites that has been building for decades, unquote. Now we move back to the author, Alistair Crooke. The philosopher Malebranche wrote in 1684 in his Traité de Morale, quote, men forgive everything except contempt. And quote again, an elite that fails in its duties is called elitist. From then on, their activity seems unjust and abusive. But more importantly, their very existence is an affront. This is the source of hatred, of the transformation of emulation into jealousy, and of jealousy into a thirst for revenge, and consequently, of wars, unquote. Alistair Crooke asks, what is then to be done to reinstate the American order and to silence dissent? A NATO victory was deemed to be necessary. And quote again, the biggest risk and biggest cost for NATO today is the risk of Russian victory in Ukraine. We cannot allow this, unquote, Secretary General Stoltenberg said at the NATO anniversary in Washington. Quote, the outcome of this war will determine global security for decades to come, unquote. Such an outcome in Ukraine versus Russia would therefore have been seen by some in Washington as perhaps sufficient to bring any rebellious dollar trading states to their senses and to reinstantiate Western primacy across the globe. For a long time, being an American protectorate was tolerable, even advantageous. No more. Uh, but no more. America no longer frightens, quote unquote. Taboos are breaking down. The mutiny against the postmodern West is worldwide, and it is clear to the global majority that Russia cannot be defeated in the military sense. It is NATO that is being defeated. Here is the quote, hole at the center of the enterprise. Biden may likely not be around for much longer. Everyone can see that. Some EU leaders, those dangerously hemorrhaging political support at home, as well as their cordon sanitaires against left and right, a fracture, may similarly see war as the exit to an EU approaching an insoluble fiscal train wreck. War, conversely, allows all fiscal and constitutional rules to be broken. Political leaders suddenly transform into commanders in chief, sending troops and offering fighter jets and longer range missiles. Could be interpreted as intentionally aiming for a wider European war. The fact, that the U.S. apparently thinks to use F-16 bases in Romania might be intended as the way to cause a war in Europe and save various sinking Atlanticist political fortunes. There is, by contrast, clear evidence that Europeans, 88%, say that, quote, NATO member countries should push for a negotiated settlement in Ukraine, unquote, with only a tiny minority of those polled believing that the West should prioritize goals like, quote, weakening Russia or, quote, restoring the pre-2022 borders of Ukraine, unquote. Rather, the European public overwhelmingly is shown to favor goals such as, quote, avoiding escalation, unquote, and, quote, avoiding direct war between nuclear armed powers, unquote. What is more likely, seemingly, is that pent-up anti-war feeling in Europe will burst forth, perhaps even ultimately leading to the rejection of NATO in its entirety. Trump may then find himself pushing at an open door with his NATO stance, because Trump, of course, has indicated that he's less than pleased, with NATO, and might consider actually withdrawing, from NATO. Of course, there may still be no Trump. It remains to be seen, but it is looking increasingly likely at this point, of course. But there is, as we know, continuous news of further revolt inside the Democratic Party against Biden, and supposed consideration by Biden now, in the face of a COVID illness, that perhaps he should be dropping out. Some people are predicting he will drop out by this very weekend. And as we all know, it is only Thursday night. This was republished from Strategic Culture Foundation by permission of the author, or a representative. I thought it was a brilliant piece, by Alistair Crook. Tells us what's happening in Europe. It tells us what the sentiments are for tanking, the Ukraine effort, for trying to make peace, and get out of it. And it tells us, of course, of the danger, okay, of nuclear war if those sentiments are not adhered to, okay, in Europe. But then, even if those sentiments are adhered to in Europe, there still is the worsening economic situation that has been exacerbated by the Ukraine war, and that is threatening the fiscal sustainability, okay, of European states. France, perhaps chief among them, but of course, the currencies of all of the European states would become fiscally sustainable if they reinstated their currencies and got rid, okay, of the euro. Uh, that is something we may yet see. And one of the very valuable things, okay, about this article is that it's the first that I've seen that suggests the possibility that what's been happening in Ukraine and what's been happening, okay, to NATO might possibly feed back, okay, to getting rid of the EU, okay, itself. I'm not saying that's explicitly said, okay, in this article, but I think this article makes the risks of that as something that would come to the fore. Uh, Certainly a possibility. So I'm going to check your comments now and see how you're going before I get to the last piece. I should tell you about my streaming, okay, on Twitter. Okay, I have upgraded to a premium account. Uh, Supposedly that fixes the Twitter streaming problem that I've had. But, okay, even though I've paid for that and I have my receipt by now so that it's recognized by Twitter, my account may not yet have been graded in such a way that I can stream to Twitter, or it might be that my settings in StreamYard now are no good and that I have to change those. But I got the same error message today as I got during the last 2 days. So, uh, so D. Pierce says, hello, April is here, and says, be a share bear. Steve Wolfbrandt is here. Also, Robert Copeland is here. And April is here. So I'm streaming at this point both to Facebook and to Twitter. There's no indication there's any problem with the Facebook sharing, but I'm going to double check that. Okay, at this point, and see what the story is. Give me a moment here. Yeah, it looks like this stream is going through. I'm not being warned or anything. This was shared by a number of kind folks on Facebook. So I, of course, will share it too at this point. I do have 16 viewers on Facebook at this point, in addition to the YouTube viewers. So let me get back to this. Robert Copeland says, nobody wins, in nuclear war. April says, hi, D, how are you feeling? And Robert Copeland asks, how many people are watching on Facebook? Well, at this point, I believe I said there were 16 viewers on Facebook at this point. So more viewers on Facebook than on YouTube at this point. I'm going to look at Twitter and see if I have any viewers on Twitter, whether it really did stream to Twitter. But I don't think it did. No. There's no evidence of a Twitter stream yet. So I have to make another adjustment other than simply paying for a premium account. So there it is. So back to StreamYard. And I will present a final piece of the evening before I go to join D. I'm pretty sure D is having a show tonight. No, I haven't really checked. Where am I? Well, there we go. This piece is by Fadhel Kaboub on July 14th, 2024. You should be seeing it now against a nice brownish gray background. You are seeing it now. It's called The New International Economic Order. Some notes from Shanghai, Nairobi, Tegucigalpa, Tunis, and Havana. So I assume this was restricted to African travels, but it's not. It goes beyond them. Greetings from Shanghai. This long post will encompass some brief comments and updates from my recent work and will be followed by more detailed notes in the next few weeks. I should say at the start, in case you don't know, Fadhel Kaboub is an MMT economist who specializes in the developing areas. At this writing, he is among the top, generally recognized as being among the top level of MMTers. His PhD, is from UMKC, the economics department there. He is also the director, CEO of the Center. I believe it's the Center for Global Sustainability. The Center for Sustainability and Prosperity at Denison University. But I'll correct that. That's not the exact title. I'll correct it towards the end of this post. Greetings from Shanghai. This long post will encompass some brief comments and updates from my recent work and will be followed by more detailed notes in the next few weeks. First, I spent the last few days in Shanghai, China, lecturing at the School of International Relations and Public Affairs at Fudan University in Shanghai from July 8th through the 23rd. That's more than the last few days. It looks like it was the last few weeks. The program is aimed for PhD students, postdocs, and early career professionals who are entering academia and public policy government positions. This year's theme is, quote, public indebtedness and the future of human development, unquote. I spent close to 6 hours split over 2 days presenting, quote, Global South Debt and Development, a strategic repositioning in a multipolar world of peace and sustainable prosperity, unquote. So clearly, Fadhel has already adjusted to the idea of a multipolar world uh, and is uh, quite favorable towards it. And engaging in the most thoughtful discussions with 120 of the sharpest young minds in China. The future of the global south is brighter. I will write more about this soon. Next, I will briefly highlight some recent events in Nairobi, Tegucigalpa, Tunis, and Havana. And here we have a picture, okay, of Fadhel standing beside his slide presentation called Global South Debt and Development, a strategic repositioning in a multipolar world of peace and sustainable prosperity. Here is the title of his center. He's the president for the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, okay, at Denison University. He's also a member of the Independent Expert Group on Just Transition and Development, and he's also the senior advisor at PowerShift Asia. Okay, then below that, there's a reference to an article. Kenyans reject the 2024 finance bill. Okay, and then below it is some text of his. Nairobi has seen major protests in the last few weeks as a reaction to the withdrawn 2024 finance bill that was going to impose higher taxes and severe austerity measures while expending budget for government officials and their spouses. I published this op-ed in The Guardian explaining the role of the IMF in Kenya's structural debt crisis. When you read this op-ed, you might find the following charts useful in reference to Kenya's structural deficiencies and how they lead to currency depreciation and an exponential increase in external debt. These slides are from a recent presentation at the University of Nairobi. And yes, corruption does matter, of course, but it is not the root cause of Kenya's debt crisis. The first slide shows Kenya's exports. The second is Kenya's imports, so you can eyeball the composition of each. And the third and fourth slides are labeled below. So, these are the exports, okay, of Kenya. I cannot see the very small print on the chart. Maybe I can expand it further. I guess I can expand it further, but I still can't see much. But evidently, cut flowers is very important. Travel and tourism, 6.41%. Tea, 9.82%. Travel and tourism, 6.85%. Okay. ICT, I've forgotten what ICT stands for. It's a field, okay, within the broader category of IT, and it accounted for 15.28% of the exports. Transport accounted for 13.36% of the exports. Insurance and finance, 5.3.9%, okay, of the exports. And then there are much smaller totals in many other categories, including even in gold, but that was only 1.17%, okay, of exports. So let me go down further. The importer in this chart, okay, was Kenya. It imports 72.8% in the ICT sector. It imports 4.44% of palm oil. If you go through these two charts and you could see them well, you would be able to track in which sectors there's a surplus, okay, of exports over imports, and in which of the areas there's a surplus, okay, of imports over exports. So in ICT, uh, uh, there's a surplus for Kenya of roughly 8%. But in petroleum oils, uh, there's a deficit in that category. Yeah, a substantial deficit because it exports only 1.85% of petroleum oils, but imports, okay, 11.06%. I presume in cars also there's probably a problem in cars also. I noticed that cars are 2.07%, but the car category doesn't seem to be very visible at all. Uh, no cars are made in Kenya at all, I guess. Anyway, if you were to study these charts very, very closely and be able to see all the figures, okay, you would see that the exchange rate for Kenya, it has been going out of sight for some time. Okay, the x-axis here, okay, is years, and you can see that, okay, through the years, the exchange rate is getting higher and higher in terms of the rate of Kenya currencies to the dollar. Okay, it's started out at what looks like it's roughly 75 and went down for a while until just before 2010. It went down to close to 50, but since then has had a rise. That was interrupted from about 2015 to 2020, but then has skyrocketed since 2000, from 2020 to 2024, and is now at what looks like roughly about 160 Kenyan currency units to the dollar. Okay, and Kenya's external debt has has gone right up there during the same years. It's followed pretty much that same curve. This is in relation to the longer term debt and the total debt. The short term debt uh, has gone up some, but generally has stayed pretty steady, okay, through the years. But Kenya now has external debt. That means debt not in their currency. I would also encourage you to read this excellent op-ed in The Guardian by Nanjala Nyabola, as well as this joint civil society statement organized by Tax Justice Network Africa, and this solidarity statement from Afro Dad. Finally, below is the link to a recent interview I did with CJTN Africa about the 2024 finance bill. CJTN Africa is a Chinese publication. So, Talk Africa was talking to Fadhel when he was in Tegucigalpa, I confess to ignorance as to where Tegucigalpa is, but the interviewer was in Nairobi, Kenya, for this interview. We move to the next item in Fadhel's list. Honduras is fighting for tax justice. It was an honor to join the government of President Xiomara Castro, who convened a special summit of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, in Tegucigalpa. So that's in Honduras. That's probably the capital of Honduras. To commemorate the 2009 coup, celebrate the enduring resistance of the Honduran people, and strengthen the hemispheric coalition in defense of popular sovereignty. Honduras is not only fighting to restore and strengthen its democracy, peace, and security, but also to rid itself of some of the most abusive rules of the global economic system. One of the boldest moves by President Xiomara Castro's administration was withdrawing from the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID. ICSID and other so-called international arbitration platforms are court-like private venues that multinational corporations use to force sovereign states, mostly in the global south, to pay punitive compensations for the hypothetical unrealized profits that they claim to have lost because of public policies that advance the welfare of consumers, workers, or the environment. In Latin America alone, more than 30 billion has been transferred from countries to corporations through these courts, not to mention the millions of lives that were negatively affected by governments not acting to serve the interests of the people when they fear the wrath of these undemocratic courts, of neo-colonial abuse. To learn more about the investor-state dispute settlement threat to sovereignty and prosperity in the global south, you can read this, this, and this. I don't know what these references are to. There's a Columbia University primer on international investment treaties. That looks real good. And there's also a primer on SDSS stories. They look to be very good also. In this context, I have to put in a brief for my book, the title of which is Declarations of Dependence. It's an ebook from Kindle. And it's about how the ISDS types of treaties with the West to global South nations have been creating what amounts to tyranny in those particular global South countries. I should probably put in a link to my book. Didn't think I'd be doing this, but I will see if I can't get you a quick link. Come on. Oh, here it is. Okay, you're now seeing my site. I will go back to the other site, in just a moment. And here is my declarations of dependence Trade, Tyranny, Sovereignty, and Democracy, published by the EIS Web Press. In case you haven't heard of that press before, it's a subsidiary of Executive Information Systems, which is owned by Bonnie. Okay, so I will give you the Amazon link to the book in the comments. I'm going to stop sharing it at this point so I can get the link. Which I will put into the comments. There we go. I hope that works. Hi, Lisa. Late and going back to the beginning to watch. Okay, so now I'm going back to Fadhel's piece. From that little digression. Where were we? What Honduras is doing is nothing short of establishing a pathway for the rest of the global South to finally decolonize the global economic architecture. If that could be done, it would be very wonderful. There is a video here. I don't know how long it is. I'll check. If it's brief, I'll just play it. So that looks like a pretty enthusiastic rally in Honduras. Honduras has also introduced a draft tax justice law that seeks to tackle tax evasion, harmful tax incentives, and banking secrecy. But it has faced strong opposition from right-wing groups who are keen to maintain the tax advantages they currently enjoy. I bet they are. While in Tegucigalpa, I joined HE. I'm not sure what that is, but that's an honorific of some sort, of course. Mr. Marlon Ochoa, who's Minister of Finance of Honduras, and my colleagues, Atia Juarez, also Maria Luisa Ortega, Jorge Coronado, and Mati Kohonen, that's, by the way, a Finnish name, on a panel discussion titled, quote, Tax Justice, the Fight Against Transnational Oligarchy, unquote. I delivered two key messages on that panel. First, while we continue to fight for a more just international tax system that goes after speculators, polluters, and the oligarchs, we mustn't lose sight of the importance of regulation that targets the roots of this abusive, extractive, and unjust system. In other words, we must both tax and regulate the unjust system out of existence, rather than just tax bad behavior for the purpose of collecting tax revenues to fund good programs. Second, we must move away from a system of fiscal redistribution, quote unquote, to a system of, quote, pre-distribution, unquote. In other words, a structural system redesign that replaces the engines of inequality, pollution, speculation, and socioeconomic exclusion with engines that produce by design more just, equitable, and sustainable outcomes for all. The visit included a closed door conversation with senior officials in the Honduran government, including several ministers and vice presidents, included with a dinner and a meeting at the presidential palace with President Xiomara Castro and the first gentleman, former President Jose Manuel Zelaya. And there's a picture. I don't know if it was Fadhel who took the picture, but I don't see him in the picture, so maybe he took the picture. Okay, there we are. There are some other graphics here. Xiomara Castro is giving a speech, okay, at the bottom. And scenes from a rally highlighting Somos Resistencia, which is resistance to the former rulers of Honduras, who I believe were the Somoza family. Okay, next is Tunis. African CSOs, that is to say civil society organizations, and decolonizing international taxation. I had the immense pleasure to speak at a gathering of African civil society organizations from 26 different countries to discuss, quote, the role of African countries in defining global tax rules, unquote, co-hosted in Tunis by the Observatory of the Tunisian Economy, OTE, and Tax Justice Network, Africa. It must have been a tremendous pleasure for Fadhel to go back, and talk to people inside of the country of his birth. Going on, co-hosted in Tunis by the Observatory of the Tunisian Economy, the OTE, Tax Justice Network, Africa. The purpose of the workshop was to further empower, inform, and mobilize Africans to remain united behind the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. My intervention was titled, quote, the geostrategic African repositioning, international taxation and economic architecture in a new multipolar world, unquote, and was made in my personal capacity rather than in my capacity as a member of the expert group of the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force. You can watch the recording, in Arabic here, and it gives a link to the recording, which is in Arabic. You can also read my initial blog from Accra, that's in Ghana, of course, when the historic vote took place last November, quote, decolonizing the international tax system. The consensus among African CSOs, civil society organizations, is that we need to remain united behind the UN Tax Convention process, to insist on rights-based and gender-transformative tax systems, and to ensure that the new global tax rules are consistent with the necessary transformation and policy action that we need for the new global rules on climate, trade, investment, and finance. To learn more about the UN Tax Convention process, you can read, and then he gives 4 links. And read this excellent infographic produced by OTE. He gives a link to that graphic also. And there is Fadhel giving his talk. Then, next topic, food sovereignty in Tunisia. Did you know that food security, quote unquote, is a dangerous neocolonial technical concept designed to force the global south into debt traps, destroy our agriculture and ecology, and increase our dependence on the global north? While in Tunis, I had the pleasure of speaking at an online event hosted by uh, 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 the Green MENA Network under the theme of John Tester has just become the second senator to push Joe Biden to drop out of the 2024 race. Of course, Tester's seat is up for grabs. It's close out there, though, and he still could win it. But if Biden remains the top of the ticket, he probably figures he's a goner. Going on. Under the theme of foods, quote, food sovereignty, whose food are we producing in Tunisia? June 24th, 2024. You can watch my intervention here, and he gives a link to his intervention. I highlighted the difference between the concepts of food, quote, food security, unquote, quote unquote, and food sovereignty, quote unquote, and put both of them in the historical context of agricultural subsidies in the global north, especially the EU's common agricultural policy and its impact on grains production in Tunisia, as well as uh, um, CAP's negative ecological impact, okay, in the global south. Uh, and okay, it looks like this is either, I think it's a report, I don't think it's a video. Let me see. Yes, okay, it is a video. I'm not going to play the video because there is no time. But the important thing to note here is that the video is from the Green MENA Network, and the title is Whose Food Are We Producing? And it's with Fadhel Kaboub and Mohsen Kalbousi. Green MENA online event, Food Sovereignty, Whose Food Are We Producing in Tunisia? Monday, June 24, 2024, at 1500 Tunis time. So, and we move on to Cuba. I think we should retitle this as The Excellent Adventures of Fadhel Kaboub. But anyway, Cuban NEIO 50th Anniversary Congress. This year I celebrated International Workers' Day in Havana, Cuba, where the new International Economic Order 50th Anniversary Congress was held. You can read the original NEIO document from the United Nations here, May 1st, 1974. The event was hosted by the Cuban government and facilitated by Progressive International, and included a large number of senior officials, diplomats, experts, and CSO leaders, civil society organization leaders from around the world. I made 2 interventions at the Congress and expressed my solidarity with the people of Cuba for their resilience in surviving more than 6 decades of illegal blockade by guess who? The first intervention focused on highlighting the colonial and post-colonial economic traps that must be structurally removed to allow for the birth of a new international economic order. The second intervention, which I will post along a blog about, was about the geopolitical opportunity that the global south has to reposition itself away from the colonial economic role that was imposed on it by the global north. I will not say more here, but you can listen to a brief description of it in the second half of this episode of the Equals podcast. And again, there's a link. Finally, since we're talking about NIEO, I cannot recommend this 1975 report enough. What Now? Okay, another development. Was published by the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation in 1975 and was presented in a special session of the United Nations. This is probably the most important economic development report that you've never heard of. Highly recommended. I will write more about it soon, but you can get a head start by reading it yourself. Everything that needed to be done in the last 50 years is carefully articulated in this document. No, that's amazing. Of course, the recommendations of the document were not followed. Uh, okay, the next is equals. Okay, the next adventure, is equals decolonizing to decarbonize. I wanted to bring to your attention this equals podcast I recorded with Oxfam's Max Lawson and Nafkote Dabe. Decarbonizing to decolonize. Take a listen. Fadhel says and leaves a link. And so you can go there from this particular post. In other words, this post is an entryway to what for most of you would be a new world. It's really a gateway to a lot of very interesting stuff. Okay. Next is a Pan-African vision for a just transition. Finally, I had the opportunity to speak at a second annual forum of the Transition Institute 1.5, quote, African Perspective on Climate Change, unquote, which is convened by Minds Paris PSL on May 29, 2024. My speech was titled, quote, A Pan-African Vision for Just Transition. We cannot decarbonize a system that hasn't been decolonized yet, unquote. You can watch the recording below and you can watch the entire event here, and Fadhel gives links, to both. And so there he is again, and you can see that presentation. And to close, let me express my sincerest apologies for the long absence. It's been a very hectic period. I will strive to post again soon. Thank you. Not sure who he's thanking. Asantini Sana, and Gracias. So I'm thinking that what we're seeing here in the characters is thank you in Chinese. Asantini Sana is probably thank you in one of the African languages. And I'm not sure what this other language is here, but the final language, of course, is Spanish. And I guess relates to Honduras and his time there. So, Fadhel is an associate professor at Denison University on leave and the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. He's also a member of the Independent Expert Group on Just Transition and Development, an expert group member with the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force, a member of the Earth for All Economic Transformation Commission, a steering committee member with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, serves as a senior advisor with PowerShift Africa. He has recently served as Undersecretary General for Financing for Development at the Organization of Southern Cooperation in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Dr. Kaboub is an expert on designing public policies to enhance monetary and economic sovereignty in the global south, build resilience, and promote equitable and sustainable prosperity. His recent work focuses on just transition, climate finance, and transforming the global trade, finance, and investment architecture. His most recent co-authored publication is Just Transition, a Climate, Energy, and Development Vision for Africa, May 2023, published by the Independent Expert Group on Just Transition and Development. He's held a number of research affiliations with the Levy Economics Institute, the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, MA, that's of course Massachusetts, the Economic Research Forum in Cairo, PowerShift Africa in Nairobi, and the Center for Strategic Studies on the Maghreb, Tunis. He's currently based in Nairobi, Kenya, and is working on climate finance and development policies in Africa, You can follow him on Twitter at Fadhel Kaboub, and you can read his Global South Perspectives on Substack, where he blogs regularly. And he launched this blog 9 months ago. So I hope you found that interesting. I found it, enormously interesting. I really did. I didn't have information on his current activities before. It was really very overwhelming, and wonderful. April says, Joe, I can't stay longer. I'm sorry, not feeling well. Interesting topic about Tunisia. Said it, good night, loves. And April has gone. Okay. Uh, and so, there are not many other comments. So I am going to leave. I think I am due over at Dee's place to help her. So I'm going to end the stream at this point. I'm sure by tomorrow night I should have the Twitter problem resolved, and I should be available streaming. On Twitter, Steve Wolfbrand says, good night, everybody. Good night, Steve. And thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. I have to say, I enjoyed, the Fadhel Kaboub entry tremendously. I thought that was very, very informative as to some things that are going on, in Africa. And I'm going to have to follow Fadhel very closely after this, because I think it's a way of keeping up of what the heck is going on in Africa in development. He's been so active. So, anyway, I'll say good night now, and hopefully I'll see a number of you over at Dee's place, where I am going right now.